Winning a World Series is one thing, but following that with another great season can be more of a challenge than expected. While there have been plenty of back-to-back champions, there's also been many who fell off the map after their championship. From the Rangers just this year to teams from 100 years ago. Championship hangover can affect us all. So let's look at the teams that did the worst job at defending their title.
Totally sports-esque. Major League.
The 2024 Rangers have made post-championship seasons a topic of discussion after what they did this year, losing 12 more games than they did in 2023 and not really being competitive. And their problems were similar to teams with similar problems. They faced tons of injuries and just an overall drop in performance. Granted, they had two of the top three MVP finalists in 2023, but they couldn't replicate it. And the Rangers were similar to teams in this era of expanded playoffs who go on an unexpected run. The Rangers were in first for much of 2023, but after sneaking into the playoffs, they weren't expected to go on a run to their first title, and they couldn't keep the magic the following year. But they weren't alone. In the wildcard era since '94, there's been teams like the wildcard 2002 Angels who followed their title by winning 77 games, 16 less. There's the '06 Cardinals who only won 83 games, but went on an October run to a title, and followed that by finishing under 500, though they had just 5 less wins. And there's the 2019 wildcard Nationals, who won 93 games and the World Series, and followed that by winning just 26 games. So bad that no fans decided to show up to their games. But this has been the case for World Series winning teams for a long time. The first World Series winning team to fall off the next season is a team we all remember in the 1910 Pittsburgh Pirates, who won 110 games and the World Series in 1909, then won 24 less games in 1910. And throughout the decade, there would be teams like the 1913 Red Sox, who won 26 less games, the 1915 Boston Braves, who won 11 less, and the 1918 White Sox, who won 43 less games. But that's because the 1918 season, just like multiple throughout the decade, were shortened because of all that stuff happening in Europe. And one poor season after a championship season can lead to many for years to come. After the Red Sox won it all in 1918 for their 5th title, they finished under 500 in a shortened 1919 season. And as Babe Ruth left to join the Yankees, the Red Sox wouldn't have another season over 500 until 1935. They wouldn't have another pennant until 1946, and they wouldn't win the World Series until 2004. It at least makes you wonder if things would have changed had the Red Sox put up a great season in 1919. And as the Yankees would become the league's powerhouse, they would have some seasons similar to the 2024 Rangers after a title. But it wasn't until 1959 that they followed a World Series with a season under 500. 27 years after the worst post-championship season occurred in the World Series only era from the 1932 Cardinals, who won the World Series and 101 games in 1931, then proceeded to go 72-82 the next year, actually winning the World Series again 2 years later. But of the first 64 World Series champions, they had the worst follow-up in terms of less wins. And of the first 64 World Series champions, 18 followed their seasons with additional losses in the double digits. And of those 18, 7 followed their seasons up with a record under 500. A better indication of a fall-off, considering championship seasons naturally come with a lot of wins. And in this era, it was the 1913 Red Sox, 1932 Cardinals, 1961 Pirates, and the 1967 Orioles, who had 20 or more additional losses following their championships. And funny enough, all but the 1961 Pirates won the World Series within the 3 years after. Pirates pulled a big upset in the 1960 World Series, where they were outscored by 28 runs and famously ended things with Bill Mazeroski's home run. But afterwards, it would take nearly a decade for them to be competitive, while the rest of these 4 were right back in the mix immediately. It took the Orioles just 2 years to go back to the World Series after their poor 1967 season, and in the first World Series of the LCS era in 1969, just like the Pirates, it was the Mets pulling off a miracle run to win the World Series. And while we talk about teams who went from being the best and having a poor season after, the Mets in 1969 were the opposite, going from winning 73 games in 68 to winning 100 the next year, which is why they're known as the Miracle Mets. But 1 year after that, they would follow it by winning 17 less games. And how much of a change the LCS era brought can be seen here. You can call their follow-up to 1969 as poor, but they had a better record by 1 game in 1970 than they did in 1973, when they made it to the World Series with a record of just 82-79. But that year was also the real start to a decade similar to the 50s with all the repeat champions. The difference being that it wasn't just one team doing all the repeating. The A's won their second straight World Series with their win over the Mets in '73. They then won again the next year for the three-peat, and the next 2 years brought the Reds repeat, and the 2 years after that brought the Yankees repeat. It was a period with 2 Pirates World Series, sandwiched over an era of repeaters, as the Yankees and Reds would have double-digit additional losses following the repeats and 100-win seasons. And that led things into the 80s, where things were completely different in terms of parity. You can call this the decade of parity, considering there were 9 different teams who won the World Series, the most in one decade, with the Dodgers being the only team that won multiple titles, 7 years apart. And it wasn't like these teams are right in the mix right after. The 83 Cardinals, the 84 Orioles, 85 Tigers, 86 Royals, 87 Mets, and the 1989 Dodgers followed their championship seasons with additional losses in the double digits. And considering the 87 Twins only won 85 games, it will be hard for them to join. Of the 10 World Series winners from the 80s, only the 89 A's followed a championship by making the LCS, and the 81 Phillies were the only other team to make the playoffs, and that's only because the playoffs were expanded in a strike-shortened season. So it was a time to just be happy with one incredible season, because next year probably wouldn't be near as great. And even to start the 90s, the surprising Reds, who won it all in 1990, followed a 91-win championship season, with a season where they finished 14 games under 500. But after the 92 Twins had a good follow-up to their title in 91, the repeats were back on with the 92 and 93 Blue Jays, which brought the end to the LCS era as the wildcard in the 3 divisions were introduced the following year. And in the immediate aftermath, the biggest beneficiary of the introduction of the wildcard was the Marlins. And the Marlins are the ultimate franchise in terms of being one-year wonders or accidentally winning a World Series. The first one came in 1997, where Edgar Renteria would hit a walk-off single in Game 7 of the World Series. And how did they follow that up? By having the worst season ever for a defending champion. As the century was coming to a close, the 1932 Cardinals were ecstatic, knowing they had the worst championship follow-up of the 20th century on lock. That is until the 1998 Marlins said, hold on. After their 92-win championship season, the Marlins went 54-108 in 1998, as it became the first to go from first to worst. The Diamondbacks and Rays had better records than them, and this was their first year of existence. The Blue Jays of 94 followed up their title by winning 55 games, after winning 95 the previous year. But that's because the 94 season ended early because of the strike. So in 47 less games, the under 500 Blue Jays in 94 won more games than the defending champion Marlins in 98, making them easily the worst defending champions of all time. And the blame can be put on their front office. After winning a title in just their 5th season, the Marlins went on a fire sale, trading Kevin Brown, Derek Lee, Dylan White, and Jeff Conine before the season. And after starting the season at 14-28, they traded Gary Sheffield, Charles Johnson, and Bobby Bonilla for Mike Piazza and Todd Zell, as Piazza would be a Marlin for like 12 seconds before becoming a Met. And after the disastrous season, they traded their NLCS and World Series MVP in Livan Hernandez. But these moves actually helped the Marlins set up their next one-year wonders in 2003, who also won the World Series as wildcards in a 91-win season. And they followed that up with another fire sale and an 83-win season. Not terrible compared to 98 and other defending champions, but it was clear that the last thing the Marlins would want is multiple competitive seasons in a 3-year span. And the wildcard era before the wildcard game, from 1995 to 2011, aside from the 98 Marlins, the 03 Angels were the only team to follow up a title with double-digit additional losses. A team that also won the World Series as a wildcard. And the only other notable team, as mentioned, was the 07 Cardinals, finished under 500, but only 5 games worse, as they won just 83 games in 2006. But in the era of the wildcard game starting in 2012 to now, there have been plenty of poor defending champions, especially compared to the previous 20 years. The Giants of the early 2010s were notorious for winning titles in even years and doing nothing in the odds, but their only true bad year in the odd years was 2013, where they went 76-86, 1 year after they went 94-68. The worst year from 2010 to 2016, 1 year after their best, in a dynasty that won 90 games just twice in that period. And since the Yankees went to their 4th straight World Series in 2001, the next to go to back-to-back World Series was the Royals, not getting the job done in 2014, but doing so in 2015. And after that 95-win follow-up, they followed that up by going 500, and not finishing over 500 again until this very year. But in the 2010s, the only team to win multiple titles besides the Giants was the Red Sox, and they followed up both years by not doing much. After 2013, they finished 20 games under 500, going from 97-65 to 71-91, the worst follow-up so far in this century, and their biggest competition is themselves. As after 2018, where they won 108 games, they won 84 in 2019. Obviously, it's hard to follow up one of the best seasons of all time, but like the 1918 Red Sox, post-championship years haven't been great for the Red Sox as of late. And in this decade, aside from the Rangers this year, the 2020 Nationals have had the biggest fall-off. Hard to really scale things considering the COVID year followed their 2019 title, but considering how the years have gone after, as Trey Turner, Anthony Rendon, Max Scherzer, and Juan Soto have all left, the follow-up was clearly not that great. So as it stands, the 2024 Rangers did not do a great job of defending their title, but they definitely aren't the worst. So far, there's been 5 teams this century with more additional losses after a title than the Rangers, though they are one of 6 to finish under 500 after. And the 2024 team is similar to many stories here, with injuries and inconsistencies from reliable players. It will eventually lead to a fall. But at the end of the day, as many of these teams went on incredible out-of-nowhere runs to get their franchise's first title, fans would gladly trade a few bad seasons for a chance at the title, especially as it's harder than ever to repeat with expanded playoffs. Or in the Marlins case, they trade 2 title seasons for 0 division titles and a front office that will make sure to trade any elite player they have. And you can watch my video about the Giants' early 2010s dynasty that knew a lot about championship hangover but always came back. And please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.